with the show. Okay, it's loading, taking a few more seconds, and then we're ready to go. I'm here with Joe. We just had a good chat. Joe has been using Celix for 6 years now. We just talked a lot about the very early days of Amazon and how he started as a seller himself back in the early days, right? So good talking. So okay, so we have hey, Steve from Louisville. All right, welcome. Yeah, if you guys just want to, give us a few, or if you want to drop us a line and tell us where you're from, I think that's always helpful to see, what kind of audience we have. If it's more US based, if it's more European based, if it's global, I think that's always helpful. So feel free to drop something in the chat, right? Just like Steve from Louisville. And then, yeah, let's jump right into it. We have, so welcome to this new show of Amazon Advertising Insights by Celix. The topic today is boosting sales and protecting your brand using sponsored display ads. So the big focus topic today is sponsored display. Sponsored display, I personally feel, has been one of the big blockbusters this year. I think it's really the advertising format or the new release that Amazon brought that has really become mainstream, that I think is driving a lot of value and has been adopted very nicely. Interestingly, I think beginning of the year, that wasn't so much the case. It's just with the change and the ASIN targeting, I think back in April or so, that really became very popular. So I think that's the sponsored display is a very interesting advertising format. And that has seen a lot of success this year. And it's also an advertising format that has some unique features, specifically the audience part and the remarketing part. So we're going to get into this. Overall, we just see great performance, but a lot of questions. So a lot of our customers, and I think generally speaking, a lot of advertisers in the market have a bunch of questions around sponsored display, how to use it on a standalone basis, but also how to use it in together with other advertising formats like sponsored products or sponsored brands and so on. And so today we want to talk about all these questions and topics. My guest today here, as I'm very excited, as I said before, is Joe Schellerud, who's the co-founder and CEO of Ad Advance. Ad Advance is an Amazon PPC agency just focusing on Amazon PPC, so really great experts there. Joe is famous for posting great content on LinkedIn and Reddit, so if you want to read some great stuff about advertising, make sure to follow him on LinkedIn. He started as a seller back in 2014, and then he co-founded Ad Advance in 2017 with Mac Wicklund. Ad Advance is, as I said, focus on helping sellers expand their sales and cut out wasted ad spend to build successful long-term businesses through Amazon advertising. They have their own proprietary software as well to a certain degree, and to help with sponsored products, but also DSP and everything advertising. Based out of Duluth, Minnesota, right?
Perfect.
Close to Canada, as you said in the intro, and is currently managing about $120 million in ad sales from clients throughout the globe. So, Joe, great to have you on the show. As I said, I'm really excited to have you with us. Quick intro to yourself also from your end.
Yeah. And first off, thanks for having me on. So like we were talking about, so I started as a seller in 2014. And so Celix is kind of the gold standard. Like it was the one piece of software that I kept throughout my entire selling career is Celix. So like awesome to be here. Awesome to meet you. So I started as a seller in 2014. As I was going through that journey, started building out my own tools for myself from the PPC side. And then in 2017, really started taking the advertising side seriously, worked with Matt, the co-founder for Ad Advance. And then since that, we've really been focused on the advertising side and a lot of exciting stuff to talk about. It's definitely been a changing landscape and a ton of great ways for sellers to really set themselves apart now with all the new features. So definitely excited to cover that with you.
Awesome. Well, look, that's great. We have, it seems, a quite US and North America based audience today, Toronto, Tennessee, US and Canada, right? So a bunch of things. Stefan also asked whether there's going to be a recording because he will need to drop out. So yes, there is going to be a recording. The recording will be on YouTube on our Selix channel, so feel free to check it out afterwards. Just like all the previous episodes, you can find them as well there. We also have a kind of the voice recording on Spotify if you want to follow it as a podcast. So it's not lost, even though I think it's great to stay until the end, because you can ask all your questions. I think that's a key part of the shows that we always have, is we try to make it as interactive as possible. Feel free to ask any questions that you have, and we'll get into this and answer all your questions as detailed as we can. So Joe, let's jump right into it. Sponsor display, just a very brief walkthrough. What is sponsor display, and what are the key differentiators compared to sponsored products and sponsored brands?
Sure. Yeah, so sponsored display, looking at it from a really high level, it's a little bit difficult to understand just because between the different targeting types, there's a lot of differences. So we'll start with the one that's probably going to be more familiar to people, which is product targeting. So if you're familiar with sponsored products, product targeting, or sponsored brands, sponsored display is kind of the same thing, where you can target specific ASINs or categories and have your ads show up on different product listing pages. So whether it's your product listing pages or other people's product listing pages. For the ad placement for these, it's a bit different than like sponsored products. So sponsored products, you'll have that ad carousel where you see a bunch of ads. For sponsored display, the ad location is going to be either under the buy box or under the bullet points. So one thing that's really cool with this is that you get that single real estate location on the product detail pages at a pretty prominent location higher up on the page. So that's product targeting for sponsored display. Just think of that as a different placement, kind of like sponsored products product targeting. On the other side, there is audience targeting for sponsored display. And so for this one, for like remarketing, which is also called views. So they call it views remarketing actually in the ad console itself. You can get placements either on or off of Amazon. So for this one, you can pick if people have visited your advertised products, or if they've visited products that are similar to your advertised products, you can show ads for that. So if I'm on weather.com, I can see an ad that shows up and it looks like an Amazon listing. That can be a sponsored display ad, or it can also be a DSP ad. And later on, we can get into the differences between those two different ad types. But that's one piece. So it can be off of Amazon, or it can also be on Amazon. So these can still take those different ad locations, like below the buy box. So that's another spot where remarketing views can actually show up too. So, if you're comparing the two for audience targeting, think of if they viewed your page and you want to try to draw them back. They didn't purchase originally, remarketing. This is a great way to do that. Whereas product targeting, just think of that more as like just an extension to sponsored products, product targeting. Both are on a cost per click basis. There's also searches and purchases, which hasn't been officially rolled out, I believe, to everybody yet, but some may see those pop up. Searches, you can figure out if people are searching for keywords relevant to your advertised products, or purchases if you want to try to redraw back people who have already purchased your products. Say you sell a consumable. These are great ad types to try too. Again, everybody might not have them, but some may be seeing those under audience targeting. But for this one, we can really focus on views remarketing and product targeting, since most people should have those at this point.
Yeah. Okay. So that's so on the high level, those are the two things, right? ASIN targeting and then audience targeting. Mm-hmm. Now, I think they rolled out ASIN targeting officially only in April, right? April of this year. Is that correct?
Yeah. I can't remember the exact timing, but that sounds about right.
Yeah. And so my perception is that up until then, when it was only audience targeting, sponsor display, someone had a rough time to really find the adoption that Amazon wanted to. They also had somewhat of a difficult time to achieve the performance. How do you see it today? So of those two types, audience targeting, ASIN targeting, what is your recommendation? Is there one that should you only use one? Should you use both? Does it depend on your goal and the situation? So when do you use audience targeting? When do you use ASIN targeting?
Sure, sure. And so when they originally rolled out audience targeting, and it was just audience views at the time, a couple things to keep in mind for those type of ads is you're hitting people with ads when they're off of Amazon. So they're not necessarily in the purchasing mode. So it's kind of like running ads on like social media platforms and everything too. You're trying to draw them away from whatever they're doing to purchase. So typically what we see is conversion rates are going to be lower for those ads. And then at the times, their algorithms weren't as good. They were starting to test it. One thing that's been awesome is we're part of Amazon's agency development program. So we get to work with their product teams to help work on these different features. So I was actually a guest on Amazon's webinar yesterday going through some of the sponsored display features too. And so what
Nice.
I can tell you is that they have been working a lot on improving their algorithms from the audience standpoint. So if you tested audience views before, it didn't give you a good return, I would definitely test it again now, because even though it's still called views, the background, everything that's going on in the foundation for how they determine where your ads are delivered are completely different. So, but when you're looking at audience targeting, keep in mind that conversion rates are going to be lower. You may see a higher ACoS because of that, but this is a great way to drive incremental sales as you go. So for product targeting, now just kind of separate the two, even though they're both sponsored display.
Yeah.
Just look at ASIN targeting or product targeting just as an extension for sponsored products product targeting. So for that, if you're doing well on the sponsored products product targeting side, I would definitely try sponsored display product targeting. They tend to convert at about the same rate. Sponsored display is a bit lower, but at the same time, they still do really well, and they have awesome placements on the page. And we can go more in detail on some of like the higher level strategies that you can use for all of these together. But in general, look at your sponsored products product targeting. If you've got ASINs that are performing well, I would definitely set up sponsored display campaigns too to utilize those. You're probably going to see very similar performance, and it's a great way to just increase your overall ad sales.
Yeah, I'm 100% on your side. I think sponsored display ASIN targeting is a lot closer to sponsored products than it is to sponsored display audience targeting. So I think they're kind of mixing two things together that really are quite different. But so you're saying that the easiest way to get started is to just, for at least for the ASIN targeting, is if you have a well-performing ASIN targeting campaign for sponsored products, you take the same ASINs that are working well for sponsored products and you target them again, but then this time just with sponsored display.
Yep, exactly. And so what we do is, so we have a pretty complex like campaign funnel structure that we set up. But just to really simplify it, like, we can start with sponsored products. So we use the auto going to a manual product targeting campaign and a manual phrase campaign, which then goes to a manual exact campaign.
Yeah.
So, a typical campaign funnel structure for sponsored products. What we do for sponsored display is we structure our campaigns the exact same way we structure our sponsored products campaigns. So product targeting, again, it's kind of just like an extension of sponsored products product targeting. And so when you're looking to how do you set up your sponsored display campaigns, I would group the products exactly the same as you do on the sponsored product side.
Mm-hmm.
And what this does is it makes it really easy. Now you can go into your search term report for your sponsored product ads, find all the ASINs that are performing really well. Now just copy those and put them in your sponsored display campaign. So we constantly go through on a week by week basis, and high converters, we move down the funnel. One of those stages is actually moving them from sponsored products to sponsored display. So we're sharing those ASINs between all the different campaigns. So for the ASIN targeting, structure sponsored display just like you structure sponsored products, and then use that search term report to find a bunch of great ASINs to populate those campaigns with.
That's really cool. It's very similar to what we recommend in our kind of the Celix best practice funnels strategy. Now, when do you, let's say you start with a sponsored products auto campaign, there's an ASIN that's performing very well. You add it to a sponsored products manual ASIN campaign. When do you move it then to sponsored display? Do you move it in the same step, or do you leave it in sponsored products for some time and then only you move it to sponsored display?
Yep. So we actually move it in the same step. So when we find high converters that are in our auto campaign, when we move them to our sponsored products product display or product targeting campaign, we move it into the sponsored display campaign at the same time. So it just makes that step, it makes that jump. Again, kind of just like sponsored products, product targeting, sponsored display product targeting, they're just kind of extensions of each other. So we just make the exact same moves. Yep, they complement each other.
Cool. Yeah, that's very similar to what we recommend. Do you use a category campaign for sponsored products as well to source ASINs, or do you use only auto campaigns?
Yep. So we'll use category campaigns. We don't use those as frequently, but there's some that perform really well with categories. And so that's another great source to figure out high performing ASINs that you can move into more of those targeted ASIN campaigns. So we will use categories, we'll use the different filters. So they've got the price filters, the star rating, prime eligibility, all that good stuff.
Right.
So we'll use those filters as we go. Those generate other high performing ASINs. We can get those from the search term report, and now we can move them to both of our sponsored products manual campaign and our sponsored display product targeting campaign.
Okay, that's really cool. That is obviously that makes it easy because it doesn't require a completely different setup or strategy for sponsored display. It's literally you do everything that you do for sponsored products, and then you just copy paste it over to sponsored display. And it's from what we see as well, it's working very similarly in terms of performance, right? Obviously, it was fantastic at half a year ago because there was very little competition on sponsored display. Now I think things are evening out a little bit. It is certainly true that there are less placements for there's just less real estate for sponsored display, so it's changing a little. It's I'd say more competitive to a certain degree.
For sure.
But,
we've seen the exact same thing over time. Is that when it first came out, cost per click was really low, and so ACOS was awesome because there wasn't much competition. Not many people were doing it at the time. So they rolled out ASIN targeting. Within a week, we had that incorporated into our campaign funnel structure. We were starting to push everything in, and ASIN was like half of what it was for sponsored product targeting because there wasn't much competition and bids were so low. Over time, now we're starting to see the market kind of line out. And so now we're still seeing about comparable to sponsored products in terms of what we're seeing for ACOS driven by the bids. But CPC has definitely gone up as people like us have been promoting sponsored display product targeting. So it's great for everybody to use. And like you were saying too, from a volume standpoint, sponsored products is still going to be like 60 to 70% of your overall ad spend, ad sales. Sponsored brand is still going to be 20 to 30%. Sponsored display is going to be in the 5 to 10% range. So it's not going to be a huge driver in terms of ad sales and ad spend. But the key thing is that it's really easy to set up. It's really easy to share targets between the two. And it's just another placement that you can get on your page. So when you talk about things like ASIN defense strategies, that's where it really gets exciting because you can kind of push all those other competitors off your page.
Right. So let's go into this for a second. ASIN defense strategies. What do you mean by this?
So essentially what we try to do for this strategy is it's a really fulfilling strategy because you can see it play out. What you're trying to do is you're trying to push all the competitors' ads off your own listing. So say you're being heavily targeted by a competitor. Somebody goes on your product page and all they see is your competitors' ads on it. As long as you have other products that are similar, what you can do is target your own products with your other products. So I've got one product that I'm selling. I've got 10 other products that are similar. I'm going to run product targeting ads for that first product and try to push off all the rest of my competitors. And so to do this effectively, you want to take into account all three ad types. So sponsored products, I want to own that whole carousel.
Right.
Sponsored brands. So if there's any brands related to your product, if you see that show up. So I want mine to be at least one of them. Sponsored display. So now we've got ads that are showing up right below our buy box and our product description. I want to own those too. So worst case, if they come in and this product that they're viewing doesn't meet their needs, they click an ad that takes them to another one of my products,
Yeah.
and they're going to be more likely to convert because they're already familiar with my brand.
Yes.
The other thing that we see is it typically increases the conversion rate of that first product because they're seeing less for different competitors who may be like cutting you on price or different things like that. So it can be a great way to increase the conversion of your product. And typically we see great returns from these just because if they do click them, they're more likely to convert. So it's a fun strategy. It's a fulfilling strategy when you could go on a product detail page and all you see are your other ads. Like that is really cool. Same thing for like brand defense strategies. Sponsored display doesn't show up as much there, but we try to do the same thing where we own the search results, where if somebody searches for your brand, all of your products show up, none of your competitors' products show up. So then you can make sure that you're getting those clicks.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a strategy that probably everyone should use if they can, right? Because one of the things that I've seen is if your products are not relevant enough for one another, then it's very hard to, you can target your own ASINs, but you're not going to show up because you're just not relevant enough. So the prerequisite is you need to have somewhat related products
For sure.
that are working. But I think that's a great strategy that everyone should follow, is just trying to own your own placements on your own ASINs. And I think the positive side effect of this as well, if it works out and people buy both together, then it also shows up at, hey, shoppers typically buy those two things together, and then you have the bundling effect. And so you have some positive side effect that result out of this as well.
For sure.
Okay, so that's for the ASIN side. So let's say on the ASIN targeting, high level, two strategies. The first one is defend your own ASINs. The second one is copy paste whatever is working for sponsored products and duplicate this for sponsored display. Now moving into the audience side, because I think the audience side is arguably the thing that really makes sponsored display unique, right? And we had a question here from Johannes as well. When it comes to audiences, is if it's possible to only remarket on Amazon.com versus also going off Amazon. So can you just do remarketing on Amazon?
No, unfortunately not. So we don't have that control. So really what you have for control at this point is to set bids for people who have viewed similar products or people who have viewed your specific products. So from a relevancy standpoint, you're going to want to bid more for people who have specifically viewed your products than people who have viewed other products, because those people are less likely to convert. But we don't have the control on where those ads are currently shown within sponsored display. Within DSP for remarketing, you have a lot more control there, but for sponsored display, you definitely don't. So that is one piece. I will say that they're continually working on building out these features as we go. So I expect a lot more control over time for the remarketing side.
All right. And so what's the strategy that you would recommend, folks? I mean, should people be running the campaigns or not?
Sure. So I think probably the biggest thing to keep in mind is that from an ACOS perspective, these are going to be higher ACOS campaigns as you go. And the key reason is that it takes more effort to convert these people who are off Amazon, especially, into paying customers back on Amazon. You got to switch that mind frame.
Right.
So for people who sell, say, like consumables, where your profit margin is not driven from that initial purchase, but it's driven from that lifetime value of the customer. So, if you can get a new customer in, now they're going to keep repurchasing from you. That ACOS can now be kind of distributed over the life of those products. That's great. Another thing to keep in mind is that we're in a really unique time of the year too. So we just went through the holiday weekend. If you look at views remarketing, it looks at the previous 30 days to see if people have visited your product page. So over the holiday weekend, people could have been browsing a lot of different products, and yours may have been one of them. We're getting pretty close to Christmas, where people are going to be making those final purchases. And we're getting, based off of fulfillment, it'll be interesting to see like how late you can actually order and still get the products delivered on time. So we're quickly approaching the end of the holiday shopping season right now. So what you can do is you can use remarketing to target those customers who browsed your products before and are now making last minute purchases. So all of a sudden when I'm going along and I'm looking at a news site or whatever, and I see that ad pop up for that product I was considering but just never got to it, all of a sudden it might like click like, oh shoot, I still have to buy that gift. And so I could go there. It'll probably convert better right now. So now is a really unique period to run these. So I think in general, the thing to keep in mind is that it's a great strategy to build and acquire new customers. They will come at a higher price, but now is kind of a unique time to definitely test them too as you go.
And it's also a question that was raised by Casey here in the audience. Have you seen, because you talked about consumables in that example, have you seen success with non-consumable products as well? Or is audience target literally just for consumables?
Yep. So we've seen success with non-consumable products. But probably the key thing is that you want to make sure that your products are converting well. So if you're already at your ACoS limit or you feel like ACoS is too high for your standard ads, at that point, remarketing may not work as well for you. If you've got healthy margins and feel like you can spend more to acquire those new customers, then it can work really well. So if you've got high converting products, high ticket products are great, or those products that now is the time when they typically pick up a ton of sales, those can all definitely fit into the mix. So just picture like if you have the margin available to spend a little bit more to acquire those new customers, whether you're a consumable product or not, definitely consider trying this out.
Okay, so is it fair to say that just looking at ACoS, and now we could discuss whether ACoS is the right metric to assess it or not, but just looking at ACoS, you will tend to see a higher ACoS with audience targeting compared to ASIN targeting, and also compared to sponsored products?
Yep. So we typically see that. So with the conversion rates that you typically see per click, it drives up the ACoS, drives down the ROAS that you see from these. But another great way to really boost sales.
Right. Yes. I mean, it's so I think that's also been the reason why initially the adoption of sponsored display hasn't been so. I think there were two main reasons why, as long as there was on the audiences, the adoption wasn't too high. The first one is I think the ACoS tended to be higher. The second one is that the sheer volume on the audience side has been rather low, and that's something that Jim also posted as a question. So the Amazon workshop seminar say to start with 15 of your products in a sponsored display campaign.
Sure.
But this is in contradiction to the funneling and Selix, where you have a product per campaign and iterate the results. So how do you suggest structuring a sponsored display campaign, right? And I think this precise recommendation is specifically for the audience targeting, right? At least that's what I know. Yeah, maybe Jim, if you can just confirm that this is specifically for audience marketing, because I think the funneling that Joe and I we talked about is more for the ASIN targeting side of sponsored display. Now, how would you structure campaigns and ASINs for audience targeting?
Sure. And so I actually brought this up with the sponsored display team too, because I had some questions on that too. And so what I would say is so first we'll start off with the ASIN targeting side, because that's really what fits into the funnel. For that, there's no issue to like split apart your products. So if your products are split apart one SKU at a time on the sponsored product side, keep the same structure in sponsored display. If we have 10 sponsored display campaigns set up with one SKU each versus one sponsored display campaign set up with 10 SKUs each, they should perform the same. So I think their original stats that they were seeing is that people just weren't including enough products, which was really hurting the traction. And then people were looking at it and saying, I'm just not getting much for this. I'm not going to invest any more time in it. So I believe that's where that initial recommendation came from. Include all your products. It's going to increase the overall volume. And at that point, it's going to make more sense to keep investing the time into it. So whether you include all the SKUs into one campaign or split them out, as long as you've got the same number of SKUs within sponsored display in general, you should be good. Same thing for the audience targeting. If you group everything together, the one piece that you lose is just being able to fine tune the bids that you pay for each of these audience targets. But at the same time, you're not funneling any targets into the audience targeting because it's all based off of like what customers have viewed, not product targets that you're specifying. So there's not as big of a downside to just grouping all your products together and setting different bids. Amazon has up and down bidding for views. So they should adjust that as it goes. Higher converters will get higher bids, lower converters will get lower bids. So not as big of an issue to group all the SKUs together in audience targeting. But the one thing that you do lose is just that granularity on setting the individual bids for the products.
Right. So Jim just followed up and he said, I think it's for audience, but he also mentioned that they were specific to keep 15 products together. So sure. It's not what I've, so I just, when I talk to Amazon, it's literally the same explanation that you just gave, right? They said, look, you can bundle all your ASINs together. It's not even 10 or 5 or whatever. You can bundle all your ASINs together into one campaign, and then you target the audience with it. Because it's up and down bidding, you can go with like somewhat of a mix, a medium bid, and then Amazon is going to fine tune the bidding and is going to go after all your products and all the audiences, because there's not that much you can do. I mean, there are practically no settings, right? So yep. Have you heard anything specific around the 15? Does that 15 ASIN or what?
I've heard the recommendation for 10. And so, that's a piece that from the 10 standpoint that you can group them together. Again, if you have 10 individual campaigns with those SKUs, you should get about the same results. Really, right. What they're trying to say is put as many products in as you can just to generate enough volume. The other piece is that having multiple products allows you to get multiple placements. Like for like product targeting, now you can get multiple placements on the same page, where if you only have one, you can only own one spot. So I would just say, just make sure that you're including enough products so you're getting enough volume to make some solid decisions around your sponsored display campaigns.
All right. Okay. So let me see. So there are more questions, a bunch of questions coming today. That's great. We always like when it's more interactive. Manav was asking whether views remarketing versus product targeting, which one is preferred. Maybe Manav, you can depending on what you want to go after, I guess, right?
Sure. If you want to talk about which one you should start with, I would do product targeting first. Yes. So do product targeting. It's very easy to set up. It's very similar to sponsored products. Tends to get great returns. You can reuse all the ASINs from a time versus benefit perspective, I would start there. And then I would add in audience targeting after. So that's how I would prefer them. Each one kind of depends on which strategy you want to take, but that's where I would start in general.
Do you see, what would you say in terms of volume? So the sales that you generate, is it about 50-50 between ASIN targeting and audience? Is it 90-10? Like how would you say on average, right? Where is more volume that can be
sure watched? Yeah, and we've seen it really depend on, so one, for audience targeting, it really depends on the amount of traffic that you're getting on Amazon too. And then what ASINs you're targeting and what bids you're using. So in general, it can really vary between the two. I would say overall, we've seen more volume for product targeting, but that is in some aspect where we're pushing those more because we're getting better returns too. So I would say probably more volume from the product targeting standpoint, but if you're getting a ton of visits, ton of sessions on your product detail page, offsite remarketing could be a great one to drive a lot of traffic, spend, and sales.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that sometimes is forgotten. When you do audience remarketing, you can only remarket whatever people are coming to your page. So if you have 2 visitors a month, you can only retarget those 2 visitors a month. You cannot expect to have more clicks from remarketing than you get from ASIN targeting or that you have on your product, right?
Yep.
So there is a cap.
And I think that goes into the recommendation of 10 ASINs too, because if you just do one and it doesn't have enough initial traffic to it, you're not going to get much for traction at all. And so that's why they want you to expand the products that you're targeting, just so you, in aggregate, you've got enough traffic that they can actually remarket to.
After. Yeah. Yep. No, that makes sense. And I think, I mean, it also supports what you just said before, which is to start with ASIN targeting first, because the first goal is make sure that you have a ton of traffic on your ASIN. And then the second step is go and remarket that traffic that is not converting from the initial session, right? Yep. And so Manav is happy with our answer, I guess. That's great. Burke had another question. Any idea why we cannot move assigned sponsor display campaigns to a portfolio? I wanted to move them into a product category targeting portfolios. So some operational headaches.
Yep. So for that one too, we've been talking to them about this. So we found a little hack to do this. And so I can't remember the exact steps to do it, but there was a way that we were able to figure out how you could actually get sponsored display into portfolio campaigns or into portfolios. So it is a piece of feedback that we've provided to. We see a ton of value in that.
Right.
So hopefully that one is coming. And I will share that feedback too, that it's not just us sharing that once. So not officially supported at this point. Hopefully it becomes officially supported. So then you can group, like we love to group campaigns into different strategies, whether it's new product launches or ranking strategies or typical like trying to get a good return, like set an ACoS target type strategies. So yeah, definitely see where, getting sponsored display in those portfolios adds a lot of value. I will add that as feedback to provide to the team.
It's definitely, I think, for those that use portfolios, obviously they would like to include it there as well, I guess. Yeah. So let me just see. Like I had a long list of questions for you. I think I only asked the first one because we just there are so many questions coming from the audience, which
this is awesome.
Think is great.
Thank you.
So again, I think Brian asking for whether it's working for any businesses and whether any products where it's working particularly well. I think we touched on this. In which order would you approach the different audience targeting types? So any specific recommendations? So you said ASIN targeting before audience, but within audience, you start with your own ASINs, similar ASINs.
Yep, I would start with views remarketing. That one for sure. And that one's a great one. If they've viewed your product, now let's try to drive them in and get that first sale.
Right.
For purchases, now that's a big one. Do you see people actually repurchasing your product? So for like consumables, that is a great one to go after. So I'm going to use this supplement for a month. Now I'm out of it. I want to retarget those customers to come back in and repurchase. So purchases is a great piece for that if you have that available.
Right.
And then searches is another great piece to add on after views remarketing. So if people have searched for relevant keywords that are similar to your products, you can definitely add those in. It tends to be a bit broader. So I would start with views remarketing first. You've got control to set bids on anybody who's actually viewed your products, and then similar products. And then you can do the searches piece after that. And then purchases, if somebody is going to come back and repurchase your products, that's a great one to implement.
Okay. So just to be clear, not all of them are yet available, right? So currently you have the views. Now the purchases, I think, is a super interesting one. So you will be able to target users that bought a specific ASIN.
Yep. So shoppers who previously purchased your advertised products.
Your own advertised products, or can you also go after other advertised other products?
Right now it's just your advertised products.
Okay, so you could go after them after, let's say, can you set a certain time where you say after 30 days I want to go after them again? No,
there's not much for specifications right now.
Yeah, I'm sure this will come. I think, I mean, the thing that I was lobbying for some time ago with Amazon was to allow the possibility to target users that bought another ASIN. So let's say, look, you probably heard my baby in the background for a couple of minutes ago. I'm sorry about this, right? But I have a little baby now, right? And so I noticed that if I was selling, let's say, a product that is used for babies, when they're 6 months old or so, I would target users that bought a product for, like, say, 3 months old, like 3 months later, because I know that this is the time when they will need something like this, right? And so same if you're selling accessories, if you know someone bought, let's say, I don't know, a chainsaw or so, right? And then you want to sell the gloves with it, like, you know, you can target after they purchase these things. So
Sure.
I hope that this is going to come at some point.
Yeah, yeah. And so if you look at DSP, so demand side platform, so I saw a question come through about that too.
Right.
So think of that as sponsored display on steroids. So you have a ton more control on what you want to target in defining those audiences for your ads. So remarketing is included with that. You can retarget people for purchases, just like we talked about, but with much more control, being able to set the specific time frames. You can set really broad categories. So there's a ton more control that you can do with DSP. So for those sellers who have gone through them, definitely start out with all the sponsored ads. They're easy to set up, easy to test. Once you get all those structured, DSP is another great way to market to your customers with a lot more control. DSP, you can run ads both on and off of Amazon. Some downfalls for DSP is that with the control comes a ton of complexity. And then to get going, you typically have to commit to a decently high monthly spend if you're going with Amazon. If you come with an agency like us, just because we're bundling people together, you can typically start at a lot less spend and test and make sure that you're getting solid returns from it. So from like a ROAS or an ACOS standpoint, especially with the more targeting ad types like remarketing, we're getting really solid returns from it. So it's become more and more of a pillar within a lot of our clients' advertising strategies is to add on DSP. And like you're saying, so if you have a baby products, now you could find other ones that at that 3-month mark, like now you want to retarget them because they're now at the 6-month mark. There's control that you can do like that within DSP. Much more complicated than sponsored ads, but definitely that next step. So I would consider that if you feel like you fully utilize sponsored ads, DSP is another great way to really look to expand your ad sales.
Is it possible to drive sales in, you know, volumes of sales through DSP similar to sponsored products, or is it more you know, a small fraction of it?
Sure, sure. And it really matters how aggressive you want to be on it. So we've seen where we can generate a lot more volume than sponsored display right now.
Yeah.
Sponsored display is starting to use a lot of the similar algorithms. So we continually expect to see sponsored display becoming more and more like
Right.
DSP, taking some of the key features for DSP, adding those controls and continually boosting what they can offer. So I wouldn't say that it's at the volume for sponsored products. You can get really broad. So if you want to just get your brand out there, you can go super, super broad and target millions of people. For most sellers, that's not going to make sense unless you're Coke or Apple or, you know, some of the big brands that have the branding strategies.
Yeah.
So there's a ton. You can spend a lot of money on it really quickly. But from the targeted approach, it's not going to be at the sponsored products level. It just depends on how quickly you want to expand it.
Okay. And so is it, where do you see things going? Because I think sponsor display and DSP, obviously they're getting more and more similar. Do you see them merging at some point? Like, why keeping both around? Like, how do you see this?
Sure. So if you look at all the ad types, I think probably the big thing, like, so sponsored products. I feel like they've saturated most of the spots on Amazon with advertising. There's not many more placements you can give on Amazon without just completely overloading the site with ads. So sponsored products, I don't see too much change there. They are rolling out different features to try to just make it easier to add new campaigns. Like just on Friday, there's a new API update where you can copy and translate sponsored products campaigns from one market to the next and translate like from English to Spanish. So that's really cool. So I see a lot of the features in sponsored products to be more on like simplifying things down, trying to make it as easy as possible for new sellers to get going, just working on the algorithms. For the other sponsored ads, I see a lot more development coming in the sponsor brands and the sponsored display side. Sponsored display, there's going to be there's a ton of cool features that they can add, and so I think what you're going to continue to see is sponsored display continually adding the best parts of DSP while still keeping it in a very like straightforward approach that the average seller can come in and optimize. If you look at DSP, it's pretty overwhelming from the start. There's just so many options. So I see them as being two separate entities, but sponsored display continually adding some more of the best features of DSP while keeping it simple enough for sellers to be able to jump in and implement these quickly. So that's really one of the big things that sponsored display has over DSP is you can jump in there, you can get new campaigns set up right away. You can customize them really easily. It's just the control isn't as much there. So it's just weighing the complexity versus the control. So I think that'll be sponsored display be a little less on the complexity or a little less on the control, but it's going to be easier to get going. DSP is going to offer all these different complex features, but you're probably going to need somebody like us to help guide you through that process.
Yeah, I mean, I think one way that I could see things developing at some point is that DSP is going to sponsor display is going to be more for endemic advertisers, and then DSP more for the non-endemic. So Amazon internally, they always distinguish between endemic advertisers. Those are the ones also selling products on Amazon, so sellers and vendors. And then non-endemic would be advertisers that are not selling products on Amazon. Let's say Tesla, for instance, right? Well, Tesla, I don't even know, but let's say Volkswagen, right? You cannot buy a Volkswagen on Amazon. Yet they might still want to target the Amazon shopper, right? And so that they would use DSP for it. So I think it could go this way also at some point, but I think there's also a long way to go before DSP is really replacing or merging with a sponsored display, and we'll see.
Yeah, for sure. And at a high level, I mean, Amazon advertising, so it's becoming a huge online advertising platform. DSP, like you just covered, is a great way for non-Amazon sellers to actually use that platform along with the Google and the Facebooks. And so, it's a really exciting industry to be in just because they are investing a ton of time, effort. They have a ton of awesome teams working on developing these new features just because it's a major growing piece for Amazon. And it's a major profit driver for them too. So yeah, we've been having fun and new features coming out left and right, which makes it even more fun.
That's certainly that's certainly true. Do you I'm trying to say it's already we're already over time, but I mean maybe an outlook, right? Where do you see Amazon advertising going over the next couple of years? So I agree with you. Sponsored display, I think it's kind of done, right? We haven't seen any breaking changes or big changes in 2020. Anyhow, sponsored display has been a lot. Sponsored brands, the video component has been used. So branding and video overall is a big thing. So where do you see things going?
Yeah. Well, I continually see in them like for the sponsored brands aspect. So other ways to really make your brand stand out on Amazon. So that's always the hard thing for brands coming into Amazon is that you're kind of confined to their parameters. You own that same listing spot that everybody else does. And so for people who are selling products that are heavily reliant on their brand and establishing, those quality products or different things like that, continually building on the pieces that you can use to differentiate your brand. So video, that's been a really cool component. That's been a lot of fun to test, performs really well, owns a ton of real estate, great way to differentiate your products, especially if like say, for instance, we were talking about kids. So I've got a 2, 4, and 6-year-old. So I like to see like if we're buying like them a science experiment or something, I like to see it in action because if you just see the box and everything, like it's tough to see how you'd use that. Sponsor brand video is great for that. Storefronts, so they've been continually developing that to be able to give you different pages. Now you can change like the pages based off of seasonality and different things like that. Just being able to really establish your brand on Amazon, I think will be a key piece. In general, the other thing that I see is that Amazon advertising is not getting any simpler. If anything, they're going to continually add more and more controls for people like us who are constantly asking for more and more control.
Right.
And so it's going to become more and more complicated as we go. The downside for sellers is that it's becoming more and more complicated.
Right.
The upside is that if you fully understand it and can utilize all these different features, now you can really set yourselves apart. So, when I started in 2014, we had sponsored products auto campaigns. You'd set a bid for the ad group. And then if you wanted to get really fancy, you'd set up a manual campaign.
Yeah.
And that was it. And it's super easy, but no real way to really set yourselves apart. Now, if you can utilize all these ads in a coordinated strategy, that's where you can really set yourselves apart on advertising. The downside is that it's really complicated and time consuming to do that. So I continually see it getting more complex, but a ton of opportunity if you've got that holistic strategy where you can link together all these different pieces into a coordinated strategy.
Nice. Yeah, I think and we've talked about this before, but I definitely agree with you that the complexity is just getting incredible, right? And yeah, me, it is quite difficult to stay up to date about all the new changes that are rolling out and where they're rolling out. And okay, now you have this that's rolling out, but it's only rolling out in the UK, not in the US yet, or it's rolling out, but it's not in the API, it's only in the UI. And just keeping track of all the things that are happening. And that's just what's visible. And then there's everything that is where Amazon teams are reaching out directly to you. And it's overwhelming, right? So I think the way that I see things going, so on, let's say on a high level, I think that you have, let's say, two to three areas. So you have the performance side, or the performance bucket, where you have sponsor products, and I would also place sponsor display actually in this performance thing. Sure. Then you have the branding side, where you have sponsored brands, you have stores, you have posts, right? So everything around building the brand, and then I think the 2 to 3 is kind of video, which I think is paying heavily into branding, but is also very, it seems a big area of focus for Amazon, right? Where OTT and everything with video and doing video on Twitch and Kindle, Kindle as well, but also then Fire TV and whatnot, right? So yeah. It is, you will have this huge universe. And so the question for me is whether, what's the path for, let's say, the average seller that is not a, maybe a private label seller? Is Sure. there a path for those type of businesses to expand into this branding universe and video universe? Or Sure. do you think that it's going to be, well, there is performance for, let's say, the private label sellers, and then there's branding for the Coca-Colas of the world?
Yep. Yeah. So I would say, first off, just there are a ton of options. But just don't overwhelm yourself and just take the 80-20 approach for everything. So if I'm a new seller coming in, focus on sponsor products first. Like, it's going to be 70% of your overall advertising spend / sales. Get that nailed down. And then at that point, you can add another piece. So now let's add sponsor brands to the mix. If we look at the overall universe of Amazon, I mean, they have developed quite the ecosystem where they're able to get a ton of amazing data. So the other piece I would say is there's always going to be the Coca-Colas of the universe, and we're never going to compete with them. We're not going to do this super broad. We're not going to run Super Bowl commercials or anything else like that for our products. Like, that's just not going to happen. And so the key thing is that as you continually expand into these new channels, just make sure you're staying really targeted to your core market. So if I go into DSP, I'm just focusing on retargeting. I'm not focusing on hitting a category of 5 million people who may or may not be interested in my general category. So those are the key things. Like, we can keep expanding it out, but as long as we keep it very targeted, now you can continue to get that solid return instead of just throwing a lot of advertising money at getting your brand out there, which is really hard to demonstrate if you're even getting any returns from that. So that's the key thing. I think, like, it's fun to look at the big advertisers of the world, but at the same time, we've got to remain very focused on what works for the individual sellers, get them the solid return. Once we get that, now we can add another channel in the mix.
Yeah, I think that's a very good summary of things. Before we come to the end, is there any closing remark that you like, or closing recommendations specifically now as we're, I mean, on the one side, it feels like it's already Christmas, right? Or it's almost Christmas.
Yeah.
But on the other side, it's still, and we've seen this in the data, and Thomas and Yasser talked about it last week in the show. You still have the highest conversion rates of the year up until 19th, 20th or so, right?
Yeah,
we'll see this year depending on how long the shipping goes, right? But let's say today is December 8th, so we still have, let's say, a good at least 10 days or so where you actually have the highest conversion rates in the entire year. So do you have I definitely wouldn't recommend to call it a deal and say, hey, the season's over. Like, I think we're in the peak of the season right now. Do you have any recommendations of how people can take advantage of the next 10, 12 days?
Yep. So we've seen the exact same thing, just what you were covering. So right now, there's a peak in conversion rates on Cyber Monday, drops off a bit, and now we're into like the massive conversion rate time. Right. Meaning people click on your ads, they're much more likely to purchase right now than they typically would be. Right. So if we look at the data from last year for our clients, we started to see a drop off in conversion rates starting about the 17th. It still stayed strong to about the 20th, just like what you were saying too. And the key thing for this year is all fulfillment. 2020 has thrown us a lot of curveballs. It's going to be very interesting to see if I add a cart to my product, what can get here before the holidays. And that's really going to drive where the conversion rates start dropping off. So if you're seeing delivery dates like a week out, 10 days out, already after Christmas right now, we may start seeing that conversion rate drop off earlier than it did last year. So those are the key things that I would look for your products. Add them to the cart, see when the expected delivery date is. If it's past Christmas now, I would start proactively cutting back bids because you're going to see conversion rate fall pretty steeply once we hit that point. So until then, now is the best time to be aggressive if you've got the inventory available. Now is the best time to test out some other different methods. You're going to convert at pretty much the best conversion rates that you see all year if you're a typical product. And so really test out everything that you've got for the next 5 to 10 days, and then just really watch those shipping times. Once they're past Christmas, now you want to proactively cut back bids or you could waste a lot of money on your ad spend.
All right. Yeah, I think nothing to add there. I think obviously this year is a different one, but it's still overall we see the levels are very high also compared to last year, right? So there's a lot of sales to make. And so, for instance, in Germany, they just announced a stricter lockdown starting next week. So they will close all the shops next week, and you will have to buy online. So I do expect that there's going to be quite a bit of craziness. So there's still a couple of questions. Maybe Joe, the last question to take. The sponsor display bids are $1. So we're getting very tactical again. We were already very strategic, but let's say one last tactical question. The sponsor display bids are at $1. Do I keep that or go lower? And if lower, would it affect the sponsor display ads?
Sure. So for a sponsored display, segment if it's product targeting or if it's audience targeting. Right. If it's product targeting, I would start with just look at what your general sponsored products product targeting ads are or your bids are and start there. So if I take how my ASINs are performing in my sponsored product ads, now I can use that in my sponsored display product targeting ads. So use that as good guidance for your starting bid there. For offsite remarketing, these are going to convert lower. So really it's testing to see what's that ideal level where you can get the traction, but still keep cost per click as low as you can. You don't want to go too aggressive from the start just because they don't convert as well. So you may see some poor returns, especially if you're very ACoS focused. So I would start, it really depends on product too. So if I'm in the supplement category, $1 seems really low. If I'm in a commodity category that has very low margins, $1 can seem very high. So it's really dependent on the category you're in. I would just say test on that and see where you start getting some traction. And then if you're not getting traction, keep working that bid up until you start seeing that.
All right. Look, so there are still a lot of questions that we won't be able to get into all of them. Burke was asking whether we have any plans at Selix to introduce new tools and features for sponsor brands and sponsor display at Selix. So yes, absolutely. We're hoping to release a sponsor display update before the end of the year. It might slip into shortly after New Year's, but we're trying to squeeze something in for sponsor display. Sponsor brands, we just released the bid automation rules, right? And I think the big thing that we're working on is that we can automate the funnel. Today, or those of you using Celix, that you can automate the funnel of keywords and ASIN targets within sponsor products. So from auto to broad to exact and whatnot, right? You can automate this, but we're working on expanding this so you can do it across advertising formats, so that the workflow that Joe just explained at the beginning, you start from auto and then you move it into sponsor products, exact, but also into sponsor display, that you can automate this entire workflow. So I think that's a big area for us. So Burke, I hope this is what you like to hear. If not, feel free to reach out. We're always open for ideas. Cool. So just closing out, because Manav, I'm sorry, we won't be able to go into your case. Manav sent a long list of questions. I don't know, Joe, if you see those questions as well.
Yeah.
Very specific case. We won't be able to analyze this here. But what I do want to do is I want to show something, because I think it's one of the biggest challenges we always have in those webinars is people are asking for specific situations and circumstances, and they say like, hey, this is my unique situation. What do I need to do? Or what can I do, right? And so I just want to, Manav, what my recommendation is go to AdAdvance, right? The website from our good friend Joe here. And here you have a campaign review tool. You can hit on activate, and then you can integrate your advertising account, and you will receive kind of a report for your own situation, because it's always very hard to just to answer this without really looking at the data. And so let me just share this here in the chat for everyone, that you can just go there and integrate, and then I'm sure, you can certainly reach out to Joe as well, but you'll get a very customized report for your situation. There are a couple of reports out there these days, but I think this is actually the best one. I've checked them out, right? I think that this is actually the most comprehensive one. And then the other thing that I also want to recommend all of you to do is just to check out our benchmarker. So the benchmarker is kind of the free report that we offer. It's quite different, because what we do is we benchmark your cost per clicks, your ACoS, and your conversion rates with your category, right? So the question is always, if you have a 10% ACoS, so if you have a 20% ACoS, is that good or bad? And the answer is always, well, it depends, right? In some categories it's good, in some categories it's bad. And so here, if you go to the benchmarker, you will get your free benchmark here as well. So feel free to check it out, right? So the kind of the benchmarker from Celix, and then the campaign review from AdAdvance. I think those are two good points for you, Manav. And yeah, feel free to check it out. So with this, Joe, anything you wanted to add to this, or?
Yeah, well, thanks for going through the tool, and like you said, it'll just go through. It can outline what features you're utilizing, what you aren't, where your key levels of opportunity are, and the benchmark report that you have too is very awesome. So I would check out both of them. The other piece is feel free to reach out to if you've got any questions, or if there's pieces that we didn't get to. Emails joe@adadvance.com, or connect with me on LinkedIn. Facebook, highly active there too. Instagram @adadvance. So Joe Schellerud, and we try to put out a lot of helpful content too. So feel free to reach out on any one of the platforms, and we'll definitely get back to you.
Yes, I totally recommend this. Joe is a great source of inspiration and learning on LinkedIn. And so if you want to dive deeper into this topic, check out Joe's content. Cool. Look, this has been great. We're obviously, we crossed 1 hour, of course, right? So people are dropping out, and so rightfully so, because we've been talking for quite some time. Thank you, Joe, for being here today, for sharing all your knowledge. I think this has been amazing. A ton of insights, very tactical, but also super strategic. And then, I hope that we can repeat this, sometime next year. And then have a good end of the season, and see you around. Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on.